Hi, and welcome to Ad Review Tips and Tricks, the second in our series of free webinars. This is Kaylee Currin, President of Currin Compliance Services. Today, Glenda Bean, our Director of Advertising Review and Compliance Education, provides valuable information about doing the job of ad review and provides tips on ways you can make it more enjoyable for yourself and, at the same time, be more effective in communicating with others during the ad review process. Those of you who attended our last webinar on strategies to mitigate sales practice risks know that this series of free webinars is part of our overall commitment to compliance training and specifically to our new online and on-demand training program we call KICT, short for Currin Insurance Compliance Education Program. KICT allows us to offer compliance training in a way that makes it both workable for busy professionals like yourselves and affordable for employers of all sizes. The courses can be purchased individually or in bundles, and licenses are available for individuals, groups, or on an enterprise-wide basis. Once purchased, each enrollee can work through the material at his or her own pace. Quizzes can be used to provide documentation of participation and understanding of the material when appropriate. I don't want to get too bogged down in the details, but each course is broken down into pieces of varying length, and they can include PDFs to read, audio recordings, or video productions. Unlike this and other webinars, the courses are not live, which lets them be on demand. You can access them anytime, and many people can be enrolled in the same course, but each person can be at a different place in the course curriculum. It may sound a little confusing, but we're confident that once you take a look, you'll find it to be the most cost-effective and engaging compliance training and education program available. At the end of today's live webinar, you'll be given an offer code for a special offer from us to you. But for now, let's get on with the event of the day. Ad review tips and tricks. Glenda?
Hi everyone, I'm Glenda Bean, Director of Ad Review and Compliance Education here at CCS, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. I've been doing ad review for many years now, and there are a whole bunch of things I've picked up along the way about how to be really effective and efficient in doing reviews, and I'm excited to share those with you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get started. With ad review tips and tricks, 3 ways to elevate your reviews and process. So I want to start out by saying this is not Ad Review 101. I'm not going to cover the substantive knowledge around laws, regs, and standards, although those things are critical components to being successful and effective at ad review. Oh, sorry, excuse me. However, there is a whole other set of criteria needed to make you an ad review superstar, and the tips I'm going to share with you today are focused in this area. On top of the substantive knowledge, you're also navigating a bunch of other demands as a reviewer. Things like managing turnaround times, getting the content to maintain a certain look and feel while still being compliant, and dealing with multiple people and personalities over the entire process, just to call out a few. The tips I'm sharing today are aimed at making your reviews more efficient, helping you become a better reviewer by providing clear and direct feedback, and giving you ideas on how to share ad review information with others. All right, my first tip is to be an oversharer. Most everywhere else, oversharing is looked at as a bad thing. Hello, TMI. But really, when you're working in ad review, that's just not the case. Oversharing can really benefit your reviews and process because it's creating a ton of communication opportunities so that the folks you work with are more in sync with what's going on and have a better understanding of what the issues are. Now, what does that really look like from the day to day? I do have some ideas. First, get some policies and procedures in place. If you already have them, great. If you don't have them, or you had them 5 years ago, but then stuffed them in the drawer because nobody followed them anyway, that's okay too. It might be a little intimidating, but just start somewhere. Start with what you know. Start with things that are big or small. It doesn't really matter because what's important is that you're just putting something onto paper. Some people think big and then they'll drill down. Other people start with the details and they'll build up. The point is, by taking the time to put your process and policies into a tangible document, you're creating something you can share with others, as well as reinforcing your own knowledge. By doing these things, you can bet your reviews will become more efficient. Why? because expectations will be clear to both yourself as well as others that you're working with, either within or outside of your department. It can really open up a whole range of opportunities. For example, you may discover where breakdowns are happening or where there may be some misunderstandings occurring. You may even be able to get feedback on how to improve the process, which ideally will lead to even more efficient reviews. Now, I know that probably sounds really nice, but you could be thinking to yourself, well, everyone's already super busy or bogged down, or you've tried distributing your procedures before, but then nothing really happens. I totally recognize that there may be some stumbling blocks along the way, and this is a technique that requires some persistence. In my own experience, it's sometimes taken repeated discussions and reminders around a process before it actually sticks. That said, I think the payoff is ultimately worth it, and I do have some ideas on how to make sharing the info a little bit more engaging and memorable. For example, get creative with how you deliver the information. Shoot out some e-blasts with short tidbits. Or maybe you can start a periodic newsletter or join in one that's already being circulated. Maybe you can start a series of tips that can be posted up in either a public space, physically or electronically, and then use your e-blast to link people to the info. Try to get creative with the ways you deliver the information and try to keep the content short and sweet. By doing both of those things, it can help get people more engaged as well as avoid overloading them to the point that they can't retain the information. If you're struggling to think of a topic to begin with, one thing you can do is think about if there are any recurring issues or a current issue around a policy or procedure, and then use that with this technique to help address it. Another way to overshare is through networking. We often hear about insurance being a relationship business, and that's true for compliance and ad review as well. Typically, as an ad review analyst, you may be working with a variety of other people. Depending on your situation, that could mean people in marketing, in legal, and product development. Perhaps it's directly with agents or marketing organizations or other third-party vendors. It's important to build and cultivate those relationships because it will facilitate in the overall workflow. It can be a lot easier to deal with a compliance issue if you feel comfortable with whoever it is you need to be talking with, and you may be able to get to a resolution more quickly. Some ways to start this process are to make face-to-face interactions whenever possible, for both work-related items, but also just in passing or in more casual times as well. A video conference is another option in creating a face-to-face atmosphere if you can't physically meet up. If that's not feasible, phone calls are the next step. Having more personal interactions just helps break down walls and builds relationships. Email can be great, it's really fast, but there can also be a tone implied or other issues that come up. So when you're looking to network, creating that lifelike interaction is a good idea. If you have some questions that you're currently struggling with, then I encourage you to try to bring those up with the individual in a more personal setting if possible, so you can start building those relationships and creating a network for yourself. I can remember when I first started reviewing ads, I would get very nervous about sending out my feedback for fear of actually having to then talk to the recipient over the phone, or worse, meet them face to face someday. I thought they would look at my feedback and think, what is she talking about? Why is she being so critical? And I had all this fear building up around some of my reviews, especially the ones that were more complex and problematic. I definitely had to push myself out of my comfort zone to pick up the phone and engage with whoever I was working with. But what I discovered was that most times I wasn't met with any negativity, but they really appreciated me taking the time to include them and work with them on getting the changes made. One of the biggest projects I initially took on was a radio show series. I was the sole compliance voice amongst a mix of agents, copywriters, and marketers. The content was long and problematic, and we had some difficult conversations along the way. At first, we were just going back and forth via email with comments, but we weren't really making much progress. So we set up some conference calls, and as we worked together, I actually became very comfortable talking with these people, and we were able to approach the work in a much more open and effective manner. My feedback was viewed as much more valuable, and there became a sense of eagerness and willingness to not only make the content compliant, but to understand the issues that I was raising. Without having those group conference calls, I don't think we could have been as effective and quick about getting to the end result. And not only that, but it made future projects much easier because we all had a good, solid working relationship. Another form of networking is by meeting other compliance professionals through industry events hosted by organizations like IADCA, which is the Insurance Advertising Compliance Association, AICP, the Association of Insurance Compliance Professionals, and our own event, KICS, the Currin Insurance Compliance Symposium. And if you'd like more information about KICS, you can find a link on our website. These are opportunities where you can connect with others in your line of work so that you can bounce ideas off of each other or even just have some more support. Oftentimes, you may be the sole individual responsible for ad review. You may also have many other responsibilities in addition to reviewing ads, so having a network with other professionals can be beneficial in sharing thoughts and concerns or getting ideas and feedback. Ultimately, these relationships can better serve you as a reviewer by helping expand your knowledge, helping you feel more confident in your decisions, and bringing another perspective in on any issues. Another way to be an oversharer is to get involved early on. This means jumping into the discussion around the creation of any ads or marketing ideas before the piece needs your review. Maybe you can't be involved in every meeting or every idea, but working on being more present in the overall concept of a campaign or strategy is useful for a few reasons. First, it gives you an opportunity to flag any major issues, which should save time because you won't be facing them down the road when there's already been an investment of resources like time and money. Second, if you are involved at the beginning, it can better help prioritize your own workload and make clear what the expectations are. Essentially, you're setting yourself up to be in a more proactive role rather than a reactive role. Another benefit is that by being involved at an earlier stage, you have an opportunity to network and build those relationships with others, and again, this can make things flow more smoothly overall. If you find that you're getting resistance to wanting to be involved more early on, you can bring up some of the benefits I just mentioned because they'll probably be pretty attractive to others as well. Highlight that by being a part of the discussions around a new campaign or strategy, it can ultimately cut down on going back and forth on a piece or dealing with major changes at a later time, and ultimately result in getting content out more quickly. My last method for oversharing is DIY tools. Things like cheat sheets and checklists, guidelines, etc. Depending on where you are, you may have some of these documents already in place. If not, you may have actually found yourself creating them as a means of making reviews easier and to help keep track of information. If you don't have anything at all, then I encourage you to start putting things down to paper because it can help the review process along to have reference materials handy. Now, I will say with this tip, you do need to be a little cautious about sharing the content because it'll change over time. Laws, rules, regs can all change, and more frequently, the market focus and issues around words or sales strategies change, and so your rules will change as well. Whatever materials you do end up distributing, it should be clear that the documents are a reference point and that depending on what the issue is, there may be additional requirements that aren't covered by the checklist. Whoever is getting these documents does need to be aware that they can and will change, and what works for now may not always be sufficient in the future. With that in mind, it's been my experience that having quick reference tools is something people really like to get, especially those creating the content, because it gives them an idea of what they can or can't say, and also what needs to be included if they're discussing a certain product or product type. It's probably one of the most requested items I've been asked for, and if those who are creating the content understand some basic requirements, it should mean a higher quality document is coming in for review and hopefully less issues to correct. So that's my tip number 1. My next tip is to say it out loud. It may seem silly at first, but reading your comments or feedback out loud can be a real game changer. Once you get into the habit of actually verbalizing feedback, you'll immediately notice where you are lacking and where you may need to clarify or flesh out what you're saying. One of the most important skills to have for ad review, and probably lots of other areas as well, is to know what you don't know. That can take time to develop, and the faster you get there, the better you will become at reviewing. When you start doing ad review, you'll probably feel like you don't know anything. Over time, and by going through many reviews, you'll start to learn what's problematic or what you need to do when you see a certain word or phrase or product discussion. Once you get to that point, you can more easily flag things that you don't know and then use the opportunity to learn more about them. And this is really about learning things more quickly. If you make knowing what you don't know a goal, you can fast track your overall ability to review even better. Reading out loud is a great way to find out what you don't know. Whatever it is about speaking your thoughts out loud, it can totally transform your understanding. What sounds right in your head may not make much sense once you state it. You may realize you're not being as clear as you thought you were, or you're leaving out some information that you're assuming your reader knows. If you are reading through a piece for the first time, you may look at it and think, okay, I understand this, but if you stop and start reading it out loud, you might realize you're not as clear about what's being discussed. If that's the case, then you have a friend in Google. It's always available and ready to help you find some more information. So you can't believe everything that's on the internet, but this can be a really great place to start exploring whatever it is you don't know. Let's say you're reviewing an ad and it's talking about a new feature and you aren't quite sure what it is or how it works. You can just quick Google it to see if there's anything else out there. See what comes up, read through it a few times, and try to orient yourself a little bit better. You'll probably still need to go to someone else to make sure your understanding is accurate, but you can approach the situation with an idea rather than being completely blank. Going into a conversation by saying, hey, I saw this feature, I think it might work like this, but I want to make sure that's accurate, can be a more helpful way to approach a discussion. Again, it's about being proactive and creating opportunities to communicate effectively. Google or any other search engine can be a mini step to help you get some clarity around any given issues and aid in those discussions. Another benefit of saying it out loud is that you can practice critical thinking. It's important to understand why you are requesting a change and what the risk is, since you may get pushback. Lots of times people will tell you, they just want to know what the change is, and not everyone has time to read through an in-depth analysis on each comment. But crafting a well-stated, succinct comment is a skill, and reading your feedback out loud will help you as both a writer and an analyst. If you're reading a comment and it's not clear what the issue is and why it needs to be changed, then you should address it and make sure you understand what you're asking for. Now, that doesn't mean every comment needs to be a huge statement, but there should be enough in there that you can discuss it further, and it's providing something for the recipient to work with. And even though you'll probably still get those requests to just put in what the change needs to be, in my experience, if that critical thought analysis isn't included, I'll end up having discussions over why the change is needed anyways. So if you take the time to include it, you're just creating some space for yourself to have those discussions if needed. I've also learned the hard way that by not taking the time to ask yourself why something needs to be changed, you may have to swallow some pride and take it back or spend more time thinking it through, which can delay the process. No one wants to be the cause of any delays, especially if ad review is already looked at as slowing down the sales process. Taking the time to read your comments out loud can save yourself a little ego bruising, as well as making sure you're not bogging down the process of getting a piece out in the field. All right, tip number 3, bend, don't break. Flexibility is going to go a long way in making your ad review process flow more smoothly because it shows that you're open and willing to change if needed, and that you are there to serve the interests of the company overall. A lot of times, compliance and ad review personnel get labeled negatively with things like sales killer or Dr. No, and that's really unfortunate, and most times it's not the case. It can be very beneficial to keep flexibility front of mind because it can change those perceptions and make the overall flow more positive and efficient. One thing to keep in mind is, what can you live with? If there are some minor wording changes going on, but the main regulatory issues are being addressed, then maybe you can let some of those things go if they're in line with your company's or organization's risk tolerance. Thinking about what you can live with, what you can rationally defend and analyze, will help you become more flexible and should be appreciated by those you work with. When you're working through a piece, go for the big win. What are the biggest issues that need to be corrected? Getting those addressed can allow you to then determine if more nuanced items are as problematic as they initially appeared. Since ad review is such a gray subject matter, drawing a distinction between what needs to change and what can be left alone is not an easy task. It's influenced by regulatory environment, your company's risk tolerance, actual laws and regs, your own personal experience, etc. So maintaining flexibility can be a challenge. It's something you'll have to keep in the forefront of your mind and really work at. You may find it more straightforward and comfortable if certain words are never used, but this can end up creating tension and add to an overall perception of ad review as a negative function. Practicing flexibility and keeping it in mind as you work through a piece can go a long way in getting real substantive issues addressed while still accomplishing the marketing goal. With this tip, if you are newer to ad review, you might not really be confident yet on where you can be flexible. It does take time to know when you can or can't bend on a given issue, but you can still practice it in your reviews. You may review something and feel like there are some items you can bend on, and then use this as an opportunity to then discuss it with a supervisor if you have one, or maybe someone in legal or product development, depending on what it is you're looking at. Maybe you can even reach out to one of your network contacts and bounce your ideas off of them. But try to find out if what's being said is sufficiently accurate, and again, create an opportunity for communication around an issue or a concern as a proactive function. Going through this process will help you understand where certain lines are and where you can be more flexible. Over time, you'll be able to make judgment calls more confidently, and flexibility will be an asset to getting ads completed in a more efficient manner. So I do have one bonus tip that I wanted to share, and if any of you have young children, you've probably seen this movie like a million times at least. It was probably during my own millionth viewing that this tip came to me, but thanks to Disney's Frozen, I encourage you all to let it go. I'll spare you guys the actual song, but the point is ad review as much an art as it is a science. It's not making widgets. There is a ton of analyzing and tone to work through, and it's not cut and dry. You'll make mistakes, and that's a bummer, but you need to let it go. If you find yourself in the middle of a review and you realize there are still issues that haven't been addressed, or you address them but it isn't sufficient, or worst case, you signed off on something and it's problematic, then you need to call it out, but try not to beat yourself up too badly about it. Taking responsibility is very important, but use the experience as a learning aid and understand that mistakes happen. If you've been doing ad review for a while, you may find some old pieces you've signed off on as totally cringeworthy. It can be like reading an old diary from high school and you're just like, what was I thinking? But you can't get hung up on those things either, and it'll certainly serve you if you learn to let it go and then just move on to the next piece. Sometimes an old piece may come back to haunt you and you'll be asked, why was it okay then but not now? Again, try to remember that rules change and the overall regulatory focus changes over time as well, and so what may be okay at one point, it just no longer works. When it does happen, know that you have an opportunity to address it, and then don't get too hung up over it. Just think of Elsa and let it go. So that brings me to the end of my tips and tricks. I really hope you enjoyed this information. For me, these are the things that take ad review from a requisite function to a valuable asset within any organization. And these are the tips that can make a difference between ad review being seen as a painful process versus a valuable one. My goal is that you can take the information I covered today and start bringing it into your own situation right away to start working toward a faster and better review experience. If you do have any questions about what I covered, you can give me an email at gbean@currincompliance.com, or if you have any requests for future webinars, I would be happy to see what I could come up with. That concludes my portion, and I'm going to give it back to Kaylee.
Thanks, Glenda. It's so easy to get mired in the weeds of our day-to-day work that we forget there are some really doable ways to actually make our own jobs easier. But as Glenda noted, this was not an Ad Review 101, but that doesn't mean we don't have training on the ins and outs of the advertising regulations and related issues. In KICT, our online education program, you'll see substantive ad review courses as part of our affordable training modules that look at specific ad review laws, regulations, and disciplinary actions, in addition to other areas of insurance compliance, including sales practice risk, mitigation strategies, policy form filing, and back office compliance. There will also be resources such as research on various topics of interest, and they'll be available on demand. As a participant in today's webinar, you can click on the offer on the right-hand side of your screen for a 10% discount worth up to $100 on a future ad review training course through KIPT. A similar discount was offered to attendees of our first webinar a couple of weeks ago, and we were thrilled with the demand, and we're happy to extend an ad review track discount to you too. We're confident that you'll find value in taking courses through KIPT. As Glenda noted, we're also holding our second annual symposium in June of this year. There's information about this event on our website. The keynote speaker, Ann Johnston, spoke at last year's IADCA conference to rave reviews, and she'll get our symposium off to a great start filled with laughter as well as important substantive content too. At CCS, we know that training is one of, if not the, most important parts of being effective in compliance. And we strive to find as many ways as we can to get you the information you need to do your job well and easily. We appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day to think about ad review tips and tricks with Glenda, and we hope to see you in the Currin Insurance Compliance Education Program soon. Thanks, and have a great day.